Listen for the quietest machine in your home. The radiator clicks, warm air moves through a vent. A thermostat notices that the room has cooled by 1 degree, and somewhere behind a wall, heat appears. Now imagine that sound stops. Not for one night, forever. No furnace, no electricity, no waterproof boots waiting by the door. Outside, the ground is frozen. The wind has stripped away most of the trees, and the next warm season is months away. You are a tropical primate with bare skin, long limbs, and no natural winter coat. Almost every large animal around you is better dressed for this place than you are. Yet humans lived through the coldest phases of the last ice age. Not everywhere, and not without enormous losses. Populations shrank. Some groups moved south. Some regions were abandoned. But enough people remained in cold landscapes for long enough that their camps, tools, hearths, and even sewing needles are still in the ground. So how did they survive winters that should have killed them? The answer was not toughness. It was a system. Humans learned to build a small, portable climate around the body, then a larger one around the camp, and finally a social safety net that stretched far beyond either. First, we need to correct the picture in our heads. The Ice Age was not one endless snowstorm, and people did not stand still while ice sheets rolled toward them. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,500 to 19,000 years ago, conditions varied enormously by place. Some land was buried under ice, some was cold steppe. Southern regions became refuges. People followed animals, rivers, coastlines, fuel, and better weather. One population model estimates that Europe may have fallen from roughly 330,000 people before the coldest point to about 130,000 near 23,000 years ago. Those are modeled estimates, not a census. But the direction is clear. Survival included retreat. Ancient humans did not defeat geography. They respected it. That matters because the first survival strategy was often movement. If a valley stopped producing food, leaving was smarter than proving you could endure it. The groups that remained in severe cold did so because they had learned how to turn animal bodies, stone, bone, fire, and shared knowledge into protection. The first layer of that protection sat directly against the skin. Clothing almost never survives for tens of thousands of years, so archaeologists have to follow its shadows: hide working tools, animal bones, awls, needles, and wear marks. At Schöningen in Germany, 2 barefoot bones dating to about 320,000 years ago carry fine cut marks in places associated with removing a hide. That does not prove someone made a fitted winter coat. It does suggest that early humans were deliberately obtaining bear skins whose insulating value would have been obvious. For a long time, clothing was probably simple: hides wrapped, tied, or fastened around the body. Then the toolkit became more precise. Awls could punch regular holes. Burins could shape bone. And by about 40,000 years ago in Siberia, eyed needles appeared. The needle is important, but not because no one could sew before it. Recent research argues that fitted clothing probably existed earlier. An eyed needle made sewing faster and finer. It allowed tight seams, repaired tears, attached fur trim, and helped build complex layers that covered the wrists, ankles, hands, and feet, the places where a loose hide fails. At the roughly 12,900-year-old La Prelle site in Wyoming, researchers identified needle fragments made from the bones of fur-bearing animals, including hares and canids. The same animals could supply both the fine bones for needles and pelts for garments. At Kammern-Grubgraben in Austria, a site occupied during winter near the last glacial maximum, reindeer remains dominate the animal assemblage and eyed needles are abundant. Researchers argue that winter reindeer fur and clothing production were central activities there. This was more than putting on a coat. It was environmental engineering. A fitted layer trapped warm air next to the body. A second layer reduced wind. Fur around an opening protected the face. Mittens kept fingers useful enough to make a fire, which kept the entire system running. Humans could not grow fur, so they invented a climate they could wear. But portable warmth only works while you can keep making heat. At Kormans-9 in present-day Ukraine, archaeologists studied 3 hearth features from the last glacial maximum: Analysis of the sediment below one feature indicates heating of around 600 degrees Celsius. That number does not tell us the temperature of the shelter or the size of the flame. It tells us that these were controlled, repeated combustion events organized differently for different tasks or occupations. Fuel was a serious problem in open, sparsely wooded landscapes. People used wood when they could get it. At some Paleolithic sites, heavily burned and fragmented bone suggests that bone was also added as fuel, especially where firewood was scarce. Bone is not a magical replacement for wood, and it burns best when fat remains in it. But in a landscape where every branch mattered, a carcass could provide calories, tools, clothing, building material, and extra time beside a flame. Then people wrapped that flame in architecture. Across Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found circular structures made from mammoth bones. At Kostenki 11 in Russia, one ring more than 12 meters across included mammoth bones, charcoal, burned bone, and stone-working debris. These circles are often described as houses, but their exact functions remain debated. Some may have been dwellings. Others may have been work areas, storage spaces, or structures used only for part of a season. That uncertainty is important. Archaeology rarely gives us a complete roof. Hide, wood, moss, grass, and snow disappear. What remains is the heavy foundation. Whatever the exact form, the physics was simple. Get below the wind. Reduce the volume you must heat. Block moving air. Use earth, hide, vegetation, or snow to slow heat loss. Keep the hearth controlled. Sleep close enough that bodies share warmth. They did not need a room at 22 degrees Celsius. They needed a pocket of air warm enough to prevent wet clothing, numb hands, and falling core temperature from turning into a fatal chain reaction. Fire and shelter solve tonight. Winter is longer than tonight. The deeper challenge was the calendar. Cold landscapes did not provide the same food every week. Herds moved, plants disappeared, fat levels in prey changed with the season. A successful group had to know not only where an animal was, but where it would be weeks later. Not only how to kill it, but when its hide was best, when its body carried the most fat, and how much fuel remained before the next move. This is why the winter occupation at Grubgraben matters. The evidence points to people targeting reindeer during a specific season while manufacturing the clothes needed for that environment. Hunting, clothing, tools, and scheduling were not separate skills. They were one plan. Food could be dried, smoked, frozen, or cached, but preservation evidence is often harder to prove than a cut-marked bone or a stone hearth. We should not imagine every Ice Age camp with a perfectly stocked underground pantry. The safer conclusion is more impressive anyway. People reduced risk through many small decisions following seasonal prey, using more of each carcass, revisiting useful locations, maintaining tools, and leaving before local resources failed. Winter survival began long before winter. The warmest shelter in the world is useless if the group inside it runs out of food. And that brings us to the technology that leaves the strangest archaeological trace. Other people. A needle can be lost in a camp. A friendship cannot. But sometimes the objects moving between groups reveal the relationship. In 2026, researchers reported that stone artifacts found at Peña Capón in central Spain came from geological sources in southwestern France, about 600 to 700 kilometers away. The connection lasted for roughly 1,400 years during part of the last glacial maximum. The researchers do not argue that one person routinely walked the entire distance for a better piece of flint. The more likely explanation is exchange through a far-reaching social network. That network moved more than stone. It could move news about herds, safe routes, fuel, weather, tool designs, marriage partners, and places where a hungry group might be welcomed. When one valley failed, a relationship somewhere else could become a survival technology. This corrects another popular image: the lone Ice Age family trapped against nature. Small bands were part of larger worlds. Cooperation did not make them peaceful or guarantee survival. But knowledge stored in many people is harder to lose than knowledge stored in one. The most powerful winter shelter may not have had walls. It was the network that gave you somewhere else to go. There is a dramatic theory that some early humans may even have entered a hibernation-like state. It is based on unusual lesions in bones from Cima de los Huesos in Spain, But the idea is controversial, and bone damage alone cannot show that a human body truly hibernates. We do not need that claim to explain the evidence. The real story is better. Ancient humans survived cold because they did not rely on a single miracle. They moved when movement was possible. They carried insulation on their bodies. They maintained fire in difficult landscapes. They built small pockets of shelter. They organized the year around animals and fuel. And they stayed connected to people beyond the horizon. They were not superhuman. Many died. Entire populations contracted, moved, or disappeared. The survivors were people with bodies much like ours, protected by a culture that no individual could have invented alone. Listen to the radiator again. That quiet click is not the opposite of Ice Age survival. It is the latest version of the same project. Notice the cold, share the knowledge, and build a warmer world together.